Today, I would like to talk a little bit about skin anatomy and health and some skin conditions and some general skin care. Now, some of this diagram that I've drawn on the board here has already been reviewed in the acne video. So if you watch that, you'll see some similarities. But I wanted to draw this one a little bit differently just to emphasize a few more things. So let's go over the anatomy of skin first. Now, the first thing to be aware of is we're not looking down on the skin here. This is cutting into the skin and then looking at it sideways. So out here is air and down here is you. And so this is a cross-section of skin under high magnification. So if you cut into your skin, you wouldn't see this. You'd have to take a slice of it and then look at it under the microscope, and then this is sort of what you would see. And of course, it's just a stylized diagram. But the important thing is just to kind of identify some of the different layers. So this first layer up here that I have just drawn in as these black lines back and forth, those are dead skin cells. Now, they're sort of alive down here close to the bottom, but they quickly lose their liveliness, so to speak. And so that layer, that epidermis, is all dead skin cells. So that's important to remember, because when you look at somebody, the only living thing that you see is their eyes, because their fingernails are dead, their hair is dead, the outside of their skin is dead, the front of their teeth is dead. Everything that you can see basically is all dead, but their eyes are alive. So that gives a perspective of what we're looking at here. So we're surrounded basically by unkillable tissue that used to be us. So we're surrounded by zombies, so to speak. And, zombies you can't kill. And so having zombies on the outside of your body keeps your body safe from the outside world. Because if the outside world got into the living tissue of your skin, well, then you'd be in a world of hurt. There would be infections, there would be a lot of pain, it would be incredibly distracting. So having this dead layer of zombies on the outside of our body is part of God's good design of how the skin works. So the next layer down, I've drawn this as this curvy thing, and I've drawn it as red just to symbolize that those are living skin cells. And those are the cells that become the dead skin cells. And so that's the dermis. Below that is just kind of some very loose tissue that has a bunch of different things in it. It has collagen in it and things, but it can slide quite a bit. And there are blood vessels that come up through that tissue. And there's a fancy name for this, but I'm going to just say loose tissue, because the fancy name basically means in Latin loose tissue. And so we'll just use that term. But that's living tissue too. And then down a little deeper is the fat layer. And of course, this is the fat that basically smooths out your rough edges and makes you look cute and also keeps you from being cold. So that's kind of an overview of the skin. And then right in the middle here, I drew this funny thing. This is a hair follicle. And so it's got a little blood vessel there. I didn't draw that one in red, but anyway, that's a blood vessel too that feeds the hair follicle. And then this little bud thing is what makes the hair. And then that builds this hair shaft, which goes out like that. And these little bumpy things on the side are basically just oil glands that lubricate the hair, and then the oil goes out onto the outside of the skin. And when we talked about that in the acne video, I talked about specifically the hair follicle and the oil glands and how those work. So I'm going to reiterate that here because it has to do with skin health, because these dead skin cells basically are flagstones that are just all piled up on top of each other. And so that protects the deeper tissue from the outside world. But part of the way that works is by having oil over the top of that. So if you picture just a pile of flagstones on the ground, then if you took water and poured it on top of them, the water would get down in between the flagstones and the ground underneath them would get wet. But if you then put a tarp over the top of the flagstones and poured water on it, then the tarp would keep the flagstones from getting wet and the ground underneath would not get wet either. So that tarp would be part of the protection. Now, if you just opened the flagstones up completely and poured water down in a hole, then the ground would get very wet. So the outside world could get in very easily if the flagstones were all separated, if the skin cells were all separated from each other. So the fact that they overlap and there's many, many, many layers of them, that decreases how easily the outside world can get down into the living tissue. And then you throw this oil tarp over the top of it, which is produced in the oil glands and flows out onto the top of the skin, and that keeps the outside world out even better. We have kind of a problem though, and that is that sometimes this oil production is decreased. It's very, very common for there to be decreased based on certain types of medications or certain conditions. And it can also vary with hormonal state as well, which we all know because of the incidence, for example, of acne in younger people tends to be less of a problem as we get older. Oil production does decrease a little bit with age. But the other thing that happens is the oil is lubricating the outside of the skin, but the skin itself can be hydrated with water, or it can be underhydrated because there's not enough water. Now the water can get in from the outside to moisten those cells, and that makes them a little bit puffier, so they take up more space. And so hydrated skin is more protective of the deeper skin layers. But you can also hydrate skin by drinking a lot of water, because then the water gets in from the inside. So those are two things that can help hydrate the skin. But when you hydrate skin, if you don't have that oil over the top, the water evaporates and the skin dries out.